Hey everybody. Hello out there.
Hello.
It's great to be with this crowd, as in Crowd Academy. And it's great to be with Elizabeth, Jeff. I mean, it sort of all started here, in the beginning of presentation, and John, and most recently, Balaji. Where's Balaji? Balaji is over there. We may well be doing a case on the crowd and consulting. But this work, at least my work on innovation, sort of started with a good portion of the group in the room. And the crowd in the firm is an active research domain. And in fact, I'm going to try to march through this book I've done with my friend Charles O'Reilly on innovation and change in incumbent firms being threatened by the crowd. How many of you are in incumbent firms? I saw the list. There are a bunch of incumbents in the room, like GE, like firms who are not just platforms. Yeah. So they have just left for this session. Yeah. So they're Nokia. There's only
Diane just left.
and the rest are crowd types. Is that right? All right. Anyway, my work has been on the impact of discontinuous technical change on incumbents. This particular one we're going to focus on now is digitization and the crowd. And Kareem and I, as he observed, we just did a special issue of strategic organization. This is a topic that strategy scholars are grappling with, organizational theory scholars are grappling with, innovation scholars are grappling with. You are the phenomena that I want to sort of learn from this session, even as hopefully you learn from me. So let me start with, and I'm going to spend most of the time with you on the case. And how many of you had a chance to see John Windsor in action? Did you see the Havas case? This is a video case, and John is sort of the central player in the case. We're going to spend the vast majority of the time on this case. But I do want you to observe that this case has nothing to do with advertising. It has nothing to do with John. It has nothing to do with David Jones. This is an issue of large organizations grappling with something from the outside. This happens to be the crowdsourced content. But it could be really anything. And I want to start, there's a big giant literature on this space. But let me start and spend maybe 10 minutes on this phenomena. Like we see Nokia here. In what way is Blockbuster the same as SIBA, Nokia, Denver Public Schools, Motorola? These are large organizations. And my research is on incumbent firms, but some of them are like tiny. Blockbuster, I think Lululemon is on the next one, which are little tiny firms. But in what ways are these all the same? And Havas, and I'm not sure Havas is there, but Havas should be there. Yeah, is that Jose?
At their point, leads under each of the verticals of their industry.
Wait, is it again, Jose? And what?
They were leads, or they are leads on the particular verticals within their industry.
When you say leads, what do you mean by leads?
Technology leads, for example.
Technology leaders.
Yes.
Yeah. Leaders. Yeah. What else?
They got crushed.
They're gone.
They're gone. That's where I want to sort of start, everybody.
Monopolistic?
Say again?
Monopolistic?
How did they get monopolistic, Jose? How did the FBI is monopolistic because it just wanted that. But how did Polaroid get monopolistic?
They were the leaders in the market. I mean, the market share
How did
was
I get
tremendous.
to the leaders? Yeah, these are all mostly large, not always large. But they had these monopoly profits rooted in what?
Technology.
They're rooted in some kind of technology. And so this notion of leads or leaders, there's something about they've got the technology, and these firms sort of rocket up and they earn, many of them earn monopoly profits because they're so like amazingly fantastic. And then was it Andy said they got crushed?
Yeah.
Yeah, how do they get crushed?
Weren't resistant, they weren't continuously asking what job they were hired to do.
What job?
All right, so I went to Christensen, it didn't work. They weren't paying attention to their threat, so they couldn't innovate.
There's some kind of threat, and the threat would be what, everybody, as we get started on this session?
Innovation.
Does something happen in the outside world? And well, some of these are digital, some of these are simply technological transitions, some of them are 9/11, some things just happen. But stuff happens in the outside world, and I'm going to focus my work with you on when these technology leaders, and these are all leaders, and then something happens in the outside world with particular reference to technology, these firms get crushed. And either they totally get crushed or they get crushed and then they come back up. Like IBM is now back up and now maybe we'll get crushed, but IBM is not dead, where Polaroid is dead. I want to sort of start with a few minutes on why is it that incumbents, in the face of technical change, when they have been so great, almost always get crushed. I just want to get a list of whys. And that's going to be an introduction to Havas, because Havas is like a brilliant example. They actually went, David Jones came to HPS and said, hey, we are not going to get crushed, Andy. We're going to buy John. We're going to buy Bundo. We're going to buy Creative Links. We're going to buy the future. We're going to integrate it. And we're not going to get crushed. We're going to actually transform ourselves to transform the industry. So I want to start this thing with why do incumbents almost always get crushed? Yeah, Michael.
They get too focused on risk of losing what they have.
So there's something about focus, and what's the risk focus thing?
So I think a lot of times they focus so much on limiting risk that they sacrifice the benefits of success.
They sacrifice the benefits that they could take more risks, but somehow they don't.
Right.
And yeah.
So to build on that, maybe they put a lot of time and energy in building a moat around their existing core technology that's profitable.
Yeah. Great.
It seems that successful innovation seems to create the antibodies against future innovation.
Yeah, like what does an antibody mean?
Yeah, it's resistant to new innovation, right?
Yeah, no, I get that, but what does that mean in an organization?
Yeah.
What does it mean in an organization when we want to do distance learning here at HBS, and we're not a place that does distance learning? We ask you to come here, and we look in your face, and you look at someone else in the face, and we have a conversation. What's the antibody? What does that mean, antibody?
I think it's people that come out of the woodwork to shoot you down and to sabotage and to make it not
Donna's taking notes on
Right.
antibodies.
Exactly.
And you saw that.
Yeah, you saw it in the case, right? I mean,
But what about cannibalization?
Wait,
fear of-
say it again about
The
cannibalization?
fear of cannibalization.
Yeah.
Every marketing department in this world is concerned about being cannibalized.
All right, what else? A few more comments I want to go on that.
I think they grow such a huge customer base that they're afraid of losing that, and the customers don't want a different product, they want optimization.
Yeah. Yeah, you get held hostage by your delighted customers. That's a big deal. Yeah.
I'd like to just expand on Steve's comments. I think maybe another way to frame that is just status quo bias with a curse of knowledge, and that these companies are used to success methods that have led them to
No, but I want
success.
to push on that a little bit, Sarah. So these firms, you know, there's been a lot written on all these firms, but Polaroid is right down the river. They actually invented in digital stuff. So they have these excess profits, and they're investing in the future. And they have Henry Ancona, who is building digital stuff, and they don't do it. So this is not that they don't take risks. They actually do take risks. they do fund the future, but something happens in that. Any sense of what that might be, sir?
You mean in the sense that they're used to, the methods they have historically implemented had led them to success, and they keep on using the same methods and thinking that will lead them to success in the
No,
future.
but
the
in this
methods
case,
can
they
change.
actually did the digital stuff. They separated out this sort of digital capability that would complement the analog. So they weren't replicating the analog with the digital, they actually had a digital thing. But, that's not it. It's not that simply getting stuck. They actually had a lot of, all these firms had a lot of experimentation.
But they didn't adapt their decision-making to the new technology or the new advancement of that technology in which they invested their R&D.
Yeah, okay, there's something about decision-making, adaptation. Anything else big belong out there before I go on? Let's go.
I mean, I'm just thinking, the corporate dynamics of the short-term measurement and the business side, not wanting to disrupt, the quarterly flow with something that's gonna take a little longer to generate the comparable.
Yeah, okay.
Well, it seems to they almost needed to abandon something that was currently successful in order to make room for this new thing, and they tried to do both, and the old's kind of won out, right? And didn't get enough in the
Yeah, and the issue for today, everybody, is the old almost always wins out. And your job, if you're in an incumbent firm, is not to let that happen. Your job, if you're a disruptor, is to take advantage of their incompetence and grow. But if you're a platform that has to depend on, if you're victims and spoils, I'm going to go to John soon, he wants to grow. He's either going to grow by himself, or he's going to partner with an incumbent. But that incumbent better be competent, or you will all get crushed. I mean, everyone in this room who's in a platform will get crushed, unless you do it on your own. And maybe you'll crush yourself, but certainly these incumbents are not attractive for some fundamental reasons I want to get on the discussion now. And by the way, it's not that it cannot be done. My book with Charles is filled with examples of the counterfactuals of firms that actually don't drop like a rock. One of the basic ideas that Eli's been working on, that Jeff, Elizabeth, and I have been working on, is that dynamic capabilities at the firm level. By the way, anything else here? Anything else? Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead.
I think there's also a sense of arrogance that we know the business, we know our customers, and any data that they might see to the contrary, they're like, we are the leaders. How can you say?
When you get up here, everybody, this stuff happens because you're really good. And what I'm going to ask you to, at least to consider, is that dynamic capabilities at the business unit level is rooted in playing what Jim March calls an exploit game. By the way, this is a strategy space that I want to work with you this afternoon. And this strategy space is anchored by a technology dimension and a customer dimension. This is incremental technical change. This is better and better ways of doing traditional advertising. Everybody, architectural innovation is when you add or subtract a component to the product or service you're delivering. So I chair one of the long executive programs here, the Program for Leadership Development. When I take out a faculty member and add a new faculty member, that's an architectural innovation. It's a new course being offered. And the faculty have to work together across boundaries to deliver to my participants an integrated program. When you take out a subsystem to your product and add another one, that will be, in Rebecca Henderson's language, an architectural innovation. A discontinuous innovation is a completely different way of doing research for Jeff. Jeff did this NASA case that he studied. He has a bunch of heliophysicists with Elizabeth. And they do heliophysics the old-fashioned way. At NASA. Well, the crowd is a totally different way of doing the same thing. A totally different way of doing research. You're making an analog camera, digital camera will be discontinuous. Technology axis. I just think the crowd, all you platforms represent a process revolution to an incumbent. No matter what platform you're in, you represent better, cheaper, faster way of doing the same thing. I'm going to label that a process revolution to the same customer. Well, and my y-axis are customers. Existing customers for Havas, and John represents not only existing customers, but potentially new customers for Havas. And one of the basic ideas in my field, in the sociology of organizations, is dynamic capabilities are rooted in playing an exploit game. I'm doing some work in public education now. And I don't mean exploiting kids. What I mean is you exploit your strategy better than anybody in the plan. That's the Jim March notion of the word exploit. You've got a strategy and you execute it really fast and competently. And the organizational architecture to exploit has a certain kind of characteristics. We'll talk about it later. But Jim's big deal idea was that dynamic capability is rooted in playing an exploit game and an explore game simultaneously. And I want to underscore simultaneous. At the business unit level, dynamic capabilities are rooted in playing two strategic games well simultaneously. And those of you who are in platforms represent a different way of doing the same thing. What I think about as a process revolution. And it takes place in the context of the old-fashioned way of doing advertising, or the old-fashioned way of doing research in geophysics, or in my world, the old-fashioned way of doing teaching. Right now, this is the old-fashioned way of doing teaching. What's the alternative to you being here and my being here?
Online.
Say again?
Online.
Online, yeah. So, online is pretty crappy.
Doesn't have to be.
Isn't that true? Online is pretty crappy?
No, it doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be. Tell me it's pretty crappy.
I'm sorry.
Tell me it's pretty crappy.
A faint shadow.
A faint shadow. But that's the point, everybody, is that if you are a university, this is executive education. And what we're doing with HBX and the work I'm doing with Kareem and Harvard Business Analytics program is here. You don't come here, we go there. It's a totally different way of driving education to a totally different customer for the Harvard Business School. That's this notion of dynamic capability, is playing two completely different games well at the same time. And how do you do that? And that's the brilliance, to me, of David Jones. We're going to destabilize the industry. We're going to destabilize our firm. We're going to acquire a bunch of firms, one of which is John. The problem is, everybody, this is easy to say, and it's nice to be a professor. Yap, in front of the real world. Everybody, we are paid to know. You're paid to do. Is that fair? I'm just doing research. We talk to them.
It's true. Yeah.
It's easy. What I'm saying right now, I am totally confident. It's just really hard to do. It's hard to do for some of the things we had on that first point. And the reason it's so hard, and we had on this first board, was I believe you have to do these simultaneously. Not sequentially, but simultaneously. This world will do everything it can do to kill this world. So Balaji is doing this consulting thing at Deloitte. Very happy. But you will get crushed unless he's able to do something quite different. This world will kill that world. And by the way, those of you who are tiny firms, at some point you have to learn to exploit. That is pivoting to go to scale. That's just as hard. So everyone's got a problem. Going to scale, if you're a little baby Lululemon, you want to go to scale, that's a gigantic challenge. If you're Nike and you want to acquire Lululemon, that's a gigantic challenge. But I want to sort of start this session with, that's what you got to do. It's hard to do it, and case in point would be the Havas case. Any thoughts on this notion of explore and exploit, and that the crowd represents a process revolution? That's what Eva described in her dissertation, and Jeff and Elizabeth led. Scott, was that a question?
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Any questions on this thing?
I got one.
Yeah, please, Mike.
There's an element of time that has to be included in this because the lettuce goes bad if it's left out. And that's what happens a lot of times to the explore, like to the, you know, if you're trying to disrupt or change or how do you exploit, there's an element of time.
Say more. Time.
I think often people will talk about, like, you know, okay, this change is gonna happen. Some of it in this swarm thing that happens, you know, something that's happening in 10 to 20 years. That's a pretty tough one to have a vision to implement. It has to be, time has to be realistic. There needs to be a time frame for success that's reasonable.
And this time frame is like this, or the time?
No, I think it has to be the smaller the better. I don't know the exact, but I do think that time is an important element to this being successful. So
being able to do
if
both.
if I can use biology as the kind of a petri dish,
Yeah.
he has a particular amount of time to make pixels successful.
Oh, until the lettuce
before the
gets.
shiny penny wears off, and it's.
And the point is that it has to, you don't have a whole lot of time. This has to be done relatively swiftly. Okay, I thought you were going, you know, no, you actually
No,
done
it has to be done swiftly. I think a lot of people say, you know, it's really easy to say, hey, in 10 years, this is gonna be true. Well, you know, you lost me at 10. You know what I mean?
But John and then to Balaji.
I think it's just as dangerous as to be too early as it is to be too late. Right? The danger for the exploit side is to be too late. The danger for the explore side is to be too early. And it's finding that kind of, that seesaw, the balance, right?
Totally. Great.
And I think the one way that you can avoid that is in some way kind of using the swarm analogy of using just mimicking. The way we kind of operate within Deloitte is we kind of mimic the exploit way of doing business, that we're still, you know, we're still exploiting the opportunity, but we are exploring. So we kind of make it feel like we are a part of the same, you know, scaling approach.
That's nice, very nice, very nice, this mimicking thing, and I want you to see, this is John mimicking Havas. You saw that in the case. I believe the reason he did this is say, hey, wait, everybody, we're an advertising agency. We're not some like wacky thing. We're mimicking. That is true until they really discover what you do. Once they discover what you do, unless you do it, and I think you probably have done it in a kind of unique way, so that's why I'm pushing you here, is that the mimicking is really important. But I want to be able to do this fast, and both because of the organizational considerations and the strategic considerations. And all I want to say right now, this is like really hard stuff, like John experienced. And I just want to give you one positive example, and we're working with Balaji, and I'm doing some work with analog devices. That is a total counterfactual. Analog devices is a magnificent example of a firm that recreates itself. But where I'm going with you in my work on structural ambidexterity is to play these games well simultaneously. And one positive example is the Ball Corporation. I just want to get this out and then we'll go straight to the case. I have the pretty amazing honor to be the class of 42 professor here at this university. The class of 42 was here a bunch of years ago for their 65th reunion. I go to this reunion. It was a men's school at the time. There were 6 men. One of them is John Fisher. This is one of his slides. in the Ball Corporation. He spent his career at the Ball Corporation. Any of you know the Ball Corporation? Have you heard of the Ball Corporation? Yes, yeah.
I used to work for the aerospace division.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So they're based out of Denver, Colorado.
The aerospace is based out of Denver.
Yeah, the Boulder office is aerospace, and a lot of the manufacturing classes in.
Anyone else know the Ball Corporation? And what is Ball Aerospace?
Well, Ball Aerospace.
Here's the Ball Corporation, everybody. So John Fisher, head of the class of 42s. Anyway, this is one of his slides. The Ball Corporation was founded in 1880, making wooden buckets. Okay? Wooden buckets. Then they got into the canning ball jars. Glass. John Fisher's first big strategic move was he bought this aerospace company. He went to the board and said, I'm going to buy an aerospace company. It's sort of like going to the board and saying, I'm going to buy Victors and Spoils. Buy Victors and Spoils. Well, he goes to the board and says, one, it's a good business, and two, they have this material science technology to make these tuna fish cans. It's going to be the next wave, and we need that material science technology. We're going to buy this aerospace company. And then he picked up this thing and he said, hey, this is a Ball product, everybody. Look in the back here, Ball. Everybody, this is a story of explore, exploit, explore, exploit, explore, exploit for more than 100 years. And this leader has a recipe, and I'm going to give you that recipe after we do the Havas case. But one of his friends in the room said, hey, John, that's really great, very inspiring post-HBS career. But what is the Ball Corporation? This is my most fundamental question for David Jones and John Windsor. What is Havas? What is the Harvard Business School? Or what is life sciences at NASA? That was Jeff and Elizabeth totally directly got at that. What is the Ball Corp? When you see that pattern, and someone says, hey, John, what's the Ball Corporation? Any thoughts as to what he said? Timothy, what do you think? Or David?
They make containers.
That's it. Period. That's all they do. They make containment. They have their identity is containment. That's all we care about, making the world's greatest containers. And he is indifferent to how we make containment. We just do containment, and whatever it is, it is. And if we have to buy an aerospace company to do containment, well, we'll do that. You could not go to the board and he goes to the board in roughly 1970, it makes a pitch to buy an aerospace company. That's a crazy thing. Unless he says, one, it's a good business, and two, we need that capability to do this next wave of containment. One of the most basic ideas that Kareem and Healer and I, or the field is working on, is one of the ways you play these games, which are internally inconsistent, is with an overarching sense of identity. And this identity, everybody, is pure emotion. You cannot do this ambidexterity thing that David Jones is going to try to do just strategically. You have to do it with your head, which is pure strategy. And you have to do it emotionally. My experience is the higher one goes in an organization, the head gets bigger and the heart gets smaller. And at the highest level of the firm, it's both like head and heart. And that's, I'm going to move into this discussion of us. Any thoughts on what I mean by identity? Because that's where I'm going in my work on structural ambidexterity. It's high differentiation, targeted integration, really strong senior team integration. You can only do that, I believe, when professional identity is clear and organizational identity is clear. So any thoughts on that identity thing before we go to Havas? What do I mean by identity? Yeah, Catherine. Katerina.
How do you How do you ensure that the new Explore model isn't perceived as a threat to
No, it is a threat,
overall
that's the whole
identity?
point,
And how
that
do you,
is the point.
and how do you merge that into a
No,
strong?
you don't, yeah, well, I asked the question, you give me an answer.
I'm a former journalist, I ask questions.
But that is the question, everybody. This is from Gila's dissertation. And the question, Katerina, is what? How do you merge the tensions?
Because you said what is like the secret to it is this overarching strong identity.
Yeah. Emotionally engaging identity, yeah.
Yes, but automatically the Explore threatens that existing identity that is modeled on the older core business that you're now exploiting. So how do you handle that and morph that into a new identity that can carry both?
Yeah, Jeff, how do you answer that question?
First, he gets 6 or 7 arrows.
Jeff totally learned the hard way.
I did too. That's why I'm asking. I have like all the bleeding wounds.
So the serious answer is, I mean, we did learn that. So we thought when we did the Explorer, we thought the data would speak for itself, but we missed the part that would be very threatening to individual solvers, and so we had to start changing the language. These are tools in the toolkit. We're going to leverage your capability. This is for you to go out and do more with your lab. So that was a long process, though. And so we hit a speed bump early on, which Elizabeth will talk more about today and Hila tomorrow.
And what did you learn, Katharina?
I learned that if you don't manage to overcome this,
Yes.
you're gonna get burned in most instances. I used to work in media where the tension between traditional print media and modern online media, especially as that changes so much faster in and of itself, creates a huge unsolved tension in most companies that are legacy media companies.
This is from Hila's dissertation. Elizabeth, you must know this. The group on my left are heliophysicists, and they're working on sunspot prediction. This is one of the biggest problems that Jeff and Elizabeth had. We launched an astronaut into space in 2009, and a sunspot storm occurs that the astronauts are physically at risk. And they've been working on this problem for a long time. They don't have a good solution. They posted it to the crowd, and this guy's the winner. He's not a heliophysicist. Retired radio engineer, big guy, cat on his shoulder. Breakthrough solution. Their reaction to that is like, no, they don't believe it. Is there any way to get a heliophysicist, or in our Havas case, is there any way to get Mercedes and the creative types? Or is there any way to get all those journalists that you work with to embrace the crowd? That is the issue I just want to leave there. Jeff will talk about that, Elizabeth Hila will talk about that. But that is the big issue. And one piece of that is this identity thing, but that is clearly not enough. It's a whole lot of other things. So let's go to the case, and this will come up in the case, but that you've put your finger on the issue for my work with you. Let's go to the last case. Can anyone articulate why why David Jones was so bullish on the crowd? Remember that David Jones starts with, we're going to revolutionize our firm and we're going to revolutionize the industry. What's in his head? You all saw the video? One on David Jones. Yeah, Sam.
He wanted to fully integrate digital into the whole company, not just have an add-on.
Yeah. Digital, integrated with incumbent. with the incumbent way of, and what's the benefit of that, Simon? Why would that be such a big idea?
That digital would be thought of from idea generation, not from something tagged on at the end. It would be central to the whole innovative process, the whole idea generation process, as well as the other aspects.
Digital could be.
Yeah.
Other reasons that David is so like into the crowd. Yeah.
The media landscape was completely transforming. Consumer behaviors had completely transformed. There was a meltdown in the advertising media industrial complex. And so it was an existential threat to and the industry as a whole, not unique to Havas. I mean, it was true across the entire industry.
Yeah, what was the existential threat? What was the big threat? In what way is John and the crowd threatening to the industry?
The one factor, I think, is the issue of control. Historically, there was brand control the message that goes to a consumer.
Yeah.
And the rise of digital had democratized content creation, peer-to-peer interaction, the brand story, et cetera, et cetera. So no longer was the brand in control, and by extension, the agency or the agency model. What you have now is, for some, this inmates are running the asylum kind of a moment.
Yeah, and that is an existential threat.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Well, there's also an issue of cost. I mean, I think Victors and Spoils was able to deliver a really high level of concept for a lower rate.
Better, faster, cheaper. Cost of Victors and Spoils way down. Absolutely. Any other? And I also want to ask, why is he talking revolution? He's actually using the word revolution.
I was going to say, like, more of a direct pipeline to the customer, faster connection with the customer. He talked about getting closer, faster, in a continuous.
Through firms like John's, Creative Links, Boondoggle, they're going to get to the customers faster, experiment with the customers. Yep. And by the way, the customers, the clients are doing some of the content generation. So this is like a great way to interact. Yeah.
You asked why revolution?
Yeah.
Well, it specifically said evolution takes time. It's a long process, and there wasn't that. It was a rapidly, completely changing landscape that had upended. I mean, revolution is by its nature a group overtaking the incumbent.
Yeah. Michael, that was his point. This penny, what now?
Shiny penny.
This shiny penny is not going to be shiny for too much longer. We're going to do a revolution. We're going to do it fast. And we're going to have John be the Chief Innovation Officer. He's in such a hurry. He's going to make John not only the CEO of Victors and Spoils, he already is the CEO of Victors and Spoils, he's also going to be the Chief Innovation Officer because we're going to make this happen fast. And the leverage for him is if we can do it, we're I think the 6th largest agency. And the other ones are way bigger and way more lethargic. We can take over the industry. What's in it for John? Let me ask the group. But I don't want to go to John. I get what's in it for David Jones. This is huge if he can execute. I'm not sure what's in it for Joe. He is the first crowdsourced advertising agency. Why would he partner with Havas?
Financial muscle and scale. Like, the model they developed is pretty replicable. There's not much of a barrier to entry. Defensive.
Say it again, defensive?
Defensive and offensive at the same time.
Yeah, defense, offense, they have financial muscle, they have scale, and I can go to scale fast, partnering with this brilliant visionary, David Jones. Any other reason that strategically that John would say, hey, because again, he could go it alone. He could try to do this on his own. Any other reasons why he would want to partner with Victors and Spoils? With Havas, rather?
Client acquisition, credibility to get into the staid, existing markets.
It gives him some credibility with clients. Did I hear that right? Jose? Catherine?
The additional scale also means speeding up the revolution. That would take longer if he went as alone.
Yeah. Notice everybody, this is a revolution for John. Even if he goes alone, he's going to go to scale. This will be a revolution for Victors and Spoils. And this will facilitate his revolution, even as David at the Havas level is going to go through a revolution. And everybody, what does the word revolution mean?
Change.
When a leader says revolution,
Change.
then I want to go to you, Jonas. What does revolution mean? More than change. It kind of means out with the old, in with the new.
Discontinuous.
It means, in my language, a punctuation. This is not incremental. This is going to be one of these punctuations. And he is going to do this proactively. This is not a crisis like Lou Gerstner goes to IBM and turns it around. This is a very strong organization that is moving proactively. And out with the old, in with the new. Probably a bad articulation, right? You're Mercedes. You are amazingly fantastic. And if he's saying out with the old, in with the new, we're in trouble. John, what were you thinking?
Well, my investors got back, had a suggestion to go out and meet all the CEOs of the holding companies. So I went and met them. I didn't know who David was. He wasn't even on my radar. So Martin Sorrell, the whole, Morris Levy, all those guys. And everybody was either dismissive or scared. And I got really fired up by that. I thought, this is it. Like, we will be able to take down a big part of the industry.
Yeah.
And I met David at TED a few months later, and David has a really great swagger, and he went up to me and said, it's super cool you're throwing rocks at the glass houses of the incumbents, but how if I gave you the keys to this holding company, and you could do what you're doing, but with 20,000 employees and billions of dollars of clients? Like, let's do this together on a much, much bigger scale. So instead of, the first conversations fired me up to go it alone, and I was dead set on that.
Yeah.
Like, I can see the way, I can see the fear in their eyes.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do this. And all of a sudden, I found a partner in crime that created a lot of security for me. That would give me a much larger platform and essentially give me the resources to blow this up, not only for myself, but for the whole industry, for the revolution.
Any questions to John? And that's really clear. He interviews a whole bunch of people, incumbents. They don't get it. David gets it and says, hey, let's do this together. We're going to help each other transform the industry. And the time is right. Alpha and then two.
So you're just saying what David said about I'm going to give you the keys and you go with it? Is that what you're talking about when you say connection, heart?
That's a heart connection between the two of them.
Yeah. That's what you're talking about?
Yes,
Okay.
oh, totally. But where I was going was the heart has to connect to the whole organization, not just with him.
But isn't it a start with one person and then you
John,
go and
John
build
would never have gone with Havas had it not been that connection. Check. Head and heart, totally brilliant. That's when David comes to create the tape. Why don't you just videotape this in action, because this is going to be magnificent. Everybody, what are the biggest challenges? By the way, and I've never asked John this publicly.
Great.
When he said, I also want you to be the Chief Innovation Officer. We're gonna take down the industry. We're gonna revolutionize Havas. I want you to be the CEO of Havas. Great job. Of Victors and Spoils. And I want you to be the Chief Innovation Officer of Havas. What went through your head?
It was a discussion. David's point of view to me was, hey, I'm the radical, but I'm the CEO. And what I need you to do is do exactly what I'm doing right now, and I can be the mediator between this radical new vision and the rest of the organization and and be able to make that transition. But if I'm the CEO sowing the vision, the revolution, it's hard to make that transition. So his plea to me was because I didn't really want to be Chief Innovation Officer. I wanted to focus on Victors and Spoils and scaling that. But his plea to me was, just do what I do, say what I say, or say what I've been saying. We were very lock sync on the vision for the future.
Yeah.
And he can kind of pull it back a little bit.
Yeah.
And be seen as a moderator inside the organization.
Good cop, bad cop.
Yeah.
Good cop, bad cop. And who was John?
Bad cop.
Oh, and then David would be the good cop.
Yeah.
Got it.
My question for John is, I can start imagining what were the interactions internally just to get everyone on board and aligned. What was and how did they, from your perspective, took the external story, the explaining to, let's say, as big as Havas is, the investors and people that expect predictability, delivery, and continuous growth, but predictable growth given the core business and how the execution has been in the past years. How was that happening? How, between the two of you, how did that occur?
Well, David's point was that, he paid some money for it, and he looked at it as his tactic was very short term, right? He said, look, I want to say I'm the future, and I want my stock, and hopefully the stock price will go up, which it did by $1 billion. And his point was like maybe 10% of that was part of the VNS story. So that, was 7 times what I paid for you guys, or for the 50% investment. So from his perspective, he's like, I made an investment, that grew 7 times. I pleased my investors. I'm psyched, a very short-term view. But what he didn't do is care about the integration, right? So.
Yeah, and that's what I want to go now, this integration. Let's assume that David wants this to happen. What would you predict, and I want to show you some of the individuals again, but what would you predict the biggest challenge will be for David and John in making this real, going from a brilliant idea into the actual execution of the idea? So what would be the biggest challenges you could predict? Yeah, Elizabeth.
Changing the culture of the existing organization to accept.
So the culture, great. And say more what you mean by culture?
Moving from the old operations model to embracing a new way of doing business, even though it's successful.
Right.
It goes back to the identity of the people that are working.
Yeah, we're going to do this democratized stuff and the control stuff. We're going to do it together, and we're going to have to somehow change our business model, which they get, and something about the culture of Havas. What else would you predict? Simrit, and then to Jennifer.
That it's difficult to bring a competitor in-house, and for the period until the culture is changed, they need to coexist and work and grow side by side.
Yeah. And you would code John as a competitor, so John would be seen as a competitor in-house? And so what do I write here? What's the challenge? So an integration challenge. Integration of a competitor. Is that the point? He is a competitor, and we're going to bring him in. By the way, is there anything to leverage between the old Havas and Victors and Spoils? Is there any leverage in the system between what John does and what Mercedes does? You know what I mean by leverage? Is there anything that can take advantage of across those two different worlds? His world and her world. Yeah, Katharina.
You have a huge client portfolio that you can use to scale the new business while at the same time being way more interesting to your clients because they're also looking for new approaches.
But I think that's part of the challenge is like that incentive. Like if I were, the head of the agency and I have to go to Unilever, my client is paying me millions of dollars in the old model and say, oh, we've got this new tool for you. It's crowdsourcing. It's gonna be a lot cheaper. They're gonna be like, what have I been paying you all these years for? It completely, they're not incentivized at all to sell the new tool, even though it's the future.
Yeah, you have to create the
Because
incentives.
But Dave has to do it, and he's got a decentralized holding model, and he didn't do it. Like all their operating companies are like, well, they reject it. Yeah.
It's a decentralized business model, but it's a federated organization. They do have this Havas independent kind of culture. top down, he's the chief innovation officer, we are doing this, we're gonna lead a revolution, let's worry about incentives, the integrating of the competitor, new business model, and by the way, let me assert, there's a gigantic amount of leverage, that's the brilliance of this thing. Everybody, if there's nothing to leverage, you spin him out. If there's stuff to leverage, you keep it inside, but deal with these tensions. Any other big challenges before you go to what you saw in the, and these are predictable in advance, these things we have on the board. Anything else you'd predict would be a challenge in making this thing real?
Yeah, I guess maybe it's building on some of that, but overcoming the objections that people, the perception people would have, what leveraging a crowd could actually mean, and then educating them on how to do that.
Say again, overcoming objections.
Yeah, the objections or perception that incumbents, I guess, would have of what a crowd represents.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think large companies operate on playbooks, which are intended to minimize risk and increase control. Crowdsourcing typically does not give you the similar amount of control and, instead of the processes that you just execute in sequence, and that shift between compared to incremental innovation when you're making tiny changes where the playbook kind of remains the same. This is a completely different playbook.
So what's the challenge of that? It's a totally different playbook, and the challenge would be what?
People are trained to follow and to deliver on this playbook.
Yeah.
And they have no clue how to do that. The 20,000 people just don't understand that.
Yeah. Okay. So given what you saw in the case, how is it going 6 months into the mission? So Kareem and I were there doing videotapes, went to Paris and did a bunch of videotapes. How's it going? What's the good, the bad, and the ugly?
Yeah, exactly.
I had a lot of hair. That's why I had a lot of hair. But how's it going? Or what did you see in the case that you said to yourself, that person really say that? Did this actually happen? What did you see in the videos that said, oh, and this is, Katharina, your issue?
Yeah.
This is your issue. What did you see in the case that signaled what she brought up earlier? Jason.
I mean, I get the tension between the explore and the exploit. But I'm not sure I understand your question.
Where did you see that in the case? Or anything that's jumped out at you when you saw the videos? This is a tension of exploit, and he represents exploit. Yeah. Yeah, George.
I thought one of the interesting things was the COO, Chris, who I would say spoke with the right words, but with zero conviction at all behind them.
Yes.
And it just suggested that even though there was this sense from David that we have the whole executive team fully aligned, we're ready to go, it's just about selling this, that was just a load of crap. And like you didn't even have the COO, you sort of had him on board verbally, but there was no conviction there.
People notice that Chris Pennington, he's saying the right things. If you actually read the case, you say, wow, this guy's great. But when you actually saw him, he's stuttering, he's like, going back. He clearly is saying the right words, but without conviction. This passion that we talked about earlier, there's no passion there. This is the senior leader who's sending mixed messages. I get the strategy, but emotionally, it's horrific. He even said what John represents. Remember what he said? What John represents is like 100 monkeys. Remember that? And all of you who represent platforms, you're like 100 monkeys. And that means you put monkeys in front of a typewriter and randomly they'll do Shakespeare. That's his model of what you do. He's saying the right words, George, but his heart is not there. And his cognitive model of a platform is like 100 monkeys. And John is like
monkey driver.
He's the monkey driver. he is David's direct report. I want to show you Mercedes because it doesn't get any better than Mercedes. And those of you who have platforms who are dealing with incumbents, you have to deal with Mercedes. And she is the most decorated, other than Jacques Seguier, who saw. She's the most decorated creative person in the Hamas empire. And she insisted to be part of this case.
Oh, interesting.
C'est une partie extrêmement importante que celle de la production d'une publicité. En fait, dans une publicité, il y a 3 temps. Il y a le temps de l'intelligence stratégique, il est fondamental. Il faut mettre les meilleurs pour chercher cette intelligence stratégique. Mais le problème de ce métier, c'est que quand on s'arrête là, c'est compliqué parce que les consommateurs, je ne peux pas les suivre un par un pour leur expliquer l'intelligence stratégique de notre démarche. Donc il faut trouver une valeur créative. C'est le scénario qui le fait, c'est le récit, c'est les talents qu'il faut pour accepter de ne pas tout dire et de dire les choses très précisément parce que les gens ont autre chose à faire qu'à nous écouter, nous les publicitaires. Donc il faut les séduire, leur plaire, leur passer le message, l'air de rien. Et puis, quand tout ça est fait, le problème c'est qu'on n'a toujours pas fini parce que tout ça n'existe que dans nos têtes et qu'il faut produire. Et produire, c'est un 3e temps qui est aussi important que les 2 premiers temps. Et si vous ratez totalement votre production, vous ne savez pas où vous en êtes. Et très honnêtement, sur Evian, c'est toujours une dramaturgie que ce moment-là, puisque nos créatifs fort talentueux inventent des choses infaisables. Donc nous avions déjà mis des bébés dans l'eau et organisé des ballets à la Esther Williams avec des bébés. Ça avait été un casse-tête inénarrable. Et les rollers ont recommencé ce genre de performance car c'est très rare de voir des bébés avec des rollers faire les exercices que vous voyez. Donc les gens qui ont travaillé dessus ont fait un travail absolument incroyable de qualité de production. Le divertissement, c'est aussi ça, la capacité de ce que nous appelons le craft, et qui est si important, l'art de produire les idées qu'on a dans la tête.
What's your reaction to Mercedes? What was she saying? Anyway,
we have the knowledge to do this. We've done this.
There's a set process.
Set process.
For creativity. It's an art. Not many people.
Art. It's a craft. Journalist. In her world, it would have been journalist. She's a creative artist. And what John represents is, she says it later on, Sorcerer's Apprentice. Her coding of John, Sorcerer's Apprentice, 100 monkeys. In their head, they know it's the future. In their heart, this is terrifying. This is an existential threat. But John has an emotional connection with David. That's great. But in the organization, this is a catastrophe happening in front of our eyes. And there's that scene with John. He walks down the corridor and all the doors shut. Do you remember that scene? All the doors shut of the senior leaders. But people down here, oh yeah, John, it's great to have you. But the senior leadership team is completely not on board. This is a nightmare, everybody. The few weeks later, David, it's a nightmare in terms of execution. Soon, for the whole exploit crowd, Andy crushes the exploit crowd. John leaves, David leaves, everybody leaves. This is like a nightmare in the execution of this thing. Is there anything that John and David could have done to have had a different outcome to this movie? This is the way most of these movies end. Is there anything, and what I'm going to stop at 1:15. I'd like you to just, I want to take 2 minutes, just someone next to you. What could David and John have done to have had a different ending? two-person buzz groups, literally 2 minutes. I want to get your point, and then I'm going to go on to my solution to this innovative challenge. What could they have done?
I don't know.
Okay, everybody, can we get back together again? I want to debrief that maybe it wasn't even 2 minutes. I want to debrief what could he have done. I want to go to John, what he thinks he could have done, and then I want to finish with my own work on structural and ambidexterity leadership and change. We'll do that by quarter up. So what could they have done to have created a different end to the movement?
One approach might have been to do a bottom-up approach, work with an individual opco, find the risk taker. In Balaji's point earlier today, we were talking, find the quote crazy person at the edges of the organization who's willing to take this on, have some initial success, and then one thing that I believe agency networks are quite good at is learning from their successes, and it could propagate in a sort of viral way. Makes me think of sort of Jeffrey Moore and crossing the chasm kind of ideas, right? Start with the early adopters and then move your way to the later majority.
So find a risk taker in an operating company, work with him or her, get some success stories, and then what?
Then share those successes with the rest of the network. The other operating companies, they compete with one another financially, for recognition, for rewards, for clients, even though they all contribute to a common P&L, ultimately. I think its own competition would create uptake.
Great. What else could you do to have a different outcome? Yeah, I was in.
Leave the company kind of outside of the core corporation, so not actually integrating Victor and Spoils, but leave it outside, give them money, let them grow and do their thing, and then maybe the core business sees like, okay, we can earn money with that, maybe we use them.
So this is not finding an operating company to work with this, being totally left alone.
Here we're talking like maybe exclude them, or just not even like do an acquisition, but just invest into the company, like take a stake in the company as well. So
let the company disrupt by the old company.
Let
the old company disrupt by the new company.
By the new company. Again, by acquiring it, but keeping it separate.
And, capitalizing it properly, right? Like giving it money to grow.
Yeah.
Giving it financial money.
But the whole point of this is this leverage in the system. How do you get leverage? So the Christiansonian solution is that solution. You should just keep it totally separate. David's strategic intent was I want him to grow, and I want to have integration. That's the stuff we talked about earlier. And that won't do that. It's not that it's wrong, but it won't deal with that integration issue.
Well, I think they should have emphasized, or we were talking about how they should have emphasized the curation aspect of it and how important that is. That this was just another way of getting ideas, but that they really could still rely on the expertise that was already in the company in order to actually bring it out to the market.
Great. To emphasize the variations from the crowd, but we
still need
curate.
what we have, and our skills and expertise.
Yeah. Another way to get ideas, and we curate. Anything else come up in the luxury of 2 minutes? Yeah, please, Brian, and then.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure how I was introduced to the company specifically, but I think a conversation, understanding where the industry is going, and then also minimize the threat. I think there was a feeling of threat, and if that could have been kind of softened, and why they're moving in this direction.
How do you do that?
I think it starts with a top-down conversation down to as they talk about their organization as more of a top-down versus a flatter. So I think it needs to start with the top and then have people buy in and support. And then.
But how do you take what is initially coded as a threat and have it recoded as an opportunity?
I think it's part of helping them understand the way the industry is going, and if they don't change and they don't move forward, that things are going to change dramatically anyway, and it could be for the worse. So.
And what do you do with Chris Pennington? What do you do with Chris?
You're right. He was. I think
he says yes, but every fiber of his body says no.
Remove him. There's gonna be people resistant to change, and if it's disruptive to the organization, the bigger picture, you can't let one individual take it down.
In my painful but much smaller scale experience, I think it starts with way more communication than you would have ever expected. That is one of my
by David.
By David, and also by John, but the communication burden is mainly on David. And whenever you think you get tired of hearing yourself say the same thing over and over again, that's only when you're beginning to actually reach your organization.
Right.
And I think what you said earlier, emphasize the curation, that's all a part of the reframing that hopefully lowers this idea of threat. And then the second thing is change the incentives in your own company, because if you incentivize working with John much stronger, and especially people in ad agencies are motivated by money,
right.
too. And then I think the third thing that's the conclusion that I've come to through painful experiences, you're always going to have a few people in key roles that might say the right thing, but they're never going to go along. And there will always be obstructionists, and they will also poison the atmosphere in the company. So I would take them out and shoot them publicly. I mean, not actually literally shoot them, but I think they have to go, and it has to be very clear that is the consequence of this. This revolution will not be stopped. I'm sure now we have gun control. We don't shoot people.
I'm going to put down changing the top team. This is a big deal. That members of your team will either change or they will be changed.
Yeah.
John, what's your takeaway upon reflection? What could you and David have done? These are a bunch of great ideas. Any reflections on that?
I think, now time passed. First of all, I think it's a cultural issue, right? So there was a lot of unperceived threat because it's a French company with their first British CEO, and then David brings in Pennington. So there's this kind of British control of a French company, there was all this tension. And then to bring me in, who was a non-French speaking American, was even more threatening. So I think that's the first issue, is to be way more sensitive to that. I think the second thing is it's about communication and language. I think instead of talking about, because I think we as an industry suffer from talking about crowdsourcing as innovative, as transformative, as disruptive. And if you want to integrate, and you want to have something adopted, those are exactly the wrong words to use. I mean, certainly it's boosted the stock price and got David famous in the industry. But on the other hand, if you want to integrate, it's all about enablement. It's all about how to do your job better. It was a big. It needed to be not innovative, but workflow. supporting the efforts as they are. It's an evolution story instead of a revolution story.
And the use of language is what Jeff mentioned earlier. That it's a tool. You put it in our back pocket. This tool is for you. It's not that you can't do great research as a heliophysicist. This is going to help you do better work. To keep astronauts safe in space. That's what their job is. Their job is not to do great research. Their job was to keep astronauts safe in space.
Yeah.
So the tool for that. So this whole use of language, the whole use of narrative, this building a team, helping the organization, deep in the organization, go from this existential threat to recoding it as an opportunity. That's gigantic. And this notion of experimenting outside, experimenting with lead users, generating some data, and once it gets more legitimacy, once it's more than just Harley, it's Harley and Disney and Ford, all of a sudden the Mercedes will say, wow, look at that. And this will catch on like wildfire. This is a social movement, top down, bottom up, and David just not good. Just not good. And execution. And I want to really focus on the execution part. Is building an organization that can live in both worlds. And what I just want to suggest, the research that Charles O'Reilly and I have done with a whole bunch of magnificent students is this notion of structural ambidexterity. What I mean by structural ambidexterity is there's a David Jones here at the top, or there's a Nithin Noria, the dean of the business school. And Nithin has one architecture for executive education, and I run a piece of that. Another architecture for HBX or for Harvard Business Analytics program, a career month. It's a completely different architecture. When I say architecture, I mean people, process, structure, and culture. And these explore and explore report to a common leader. And he or she has to be able to deal with those anxieties, transforming what could be a threat into, this is a great opportunity for the Harvard Business School or Havas or for the New York Times. And that's what Charles and I mean by structural ambidexterity. High differentiation. Targeted integration. That's why Christian and George, I said, if there's nothing to integrate, you spin this thing out. But if there's stuff to integrate, you deal with it internally, but you have to deal with all this power, politics, cliques, coalitions. High differentiation, targeted integration, and really strong senior team integration. The big deal on structural ambidexterity is not the structure, and it's not the linking. It is getting teams that can handle paradox, that can handle contradiction. And the fact is, Mercedes is magnificent and wonderful. And John is magnificent and wonderful. And they're completely on different planets. And then David has to have a narrative, both a strategy and an identity, that permits both of these things to operate simultaneously at the same time. And when they learn about how to do it, then it'll be integrated. The issue with John being the Chief Innovation Officer, I said to myself, this is not going to work. This is way too early integration. What I want to have is lots of variation in the emerging stage, in the nascent stage of a product, like lots of small experiments, minimal viable products. You're testing, you get in front of customers, getting in front of clients. Most are not going to work, some will work. But once you have a strategy that works, the customers love it, internal people want it, then you go to scale. Then you pivot to scale. So this is variation, selection, retention, and I want a leader like a David Jones to be able to play this ambidextrous game. It's a game of walking into paradox. It's a game of living in contradictions. And again, that's easy to say, it's hard to do, and where we're working now is it's helping professionals deal with their professional identity, public education, journalism, NASA, media, advertising, professional identity, and organizational identity. And both of these identity dynamics are really crucial, and that's what we're doing some work on now. But let me just end with this. At the leader level, the leader has to be able to say, when someone says, where are we going, to the board or to his or her firm, is we're going that way. That's a nonsensical sign. And that's what I mean, is we're both exploring and exploiting, and building an overarching identity, an overarching narrative, over-communicate, learn from variation, and then pivot into scale. Great to work with the crowd. Have fun with the rest of the session, everybody.